Alright guys, such comic again. I hope you're all doing better and enjoying your day so far. In the wake of Kenny's departure from the LA Thieves, Scrap gives his perspective on the change, admitting that despite the fact that they dropped him, Kenny was one of his best teammates that he'd ever played with. Still, the change was made. Neum is officially in. Will it turn the tides for this team? Also, big roster updates elsewhere. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We're going to start here quickly with this year's World Championship. The prize pool is going to be $2 million. It's the same as it was last year. I think the same as it was the year before that. 2023, I want to say, was about 2.4 million. Then it went down. This year is set to stay the same, but of course with inflation in real terms, this prize pool again is getting lower. May still be a smidge higher than what the Esports World Cup are doing, which seems to be the intention really of the COD League here, is to make sure that it is still the biggest event by prize money that will of course happen in Vegas later this year before the World Cup again in Saudi Arabia. Now, let's talk Cloud9 because some serious drama happening with this org over the last few days. They got rid of their whole team. Now, Ronnie put together a great article on this. He actually talked about a number of things. He does mention here that their previous salaries were $48,000. They then said that they'll cut them to $24,000. Current players were unwilling to accept this, leading to their release. They've all announced their free agents. Mack is not announced yet, but of course, well, the team's announced it now, so even though Mack hasn't said anything, we know that that is true. Now, he reached out to Jack Etienne, who gave a few comments. Now, look, say what you want about Jack. He is a relatively astute businessman, and as unfortunate as it is what they're currently doing, you can see the logic in it. I think my general frustration about this is that, yes, the free market may suggest you can pay players this and they will still do it. But we're in a franchised system here, which changes the battlegrounds to a certain extent. But I'll discuss that more in a second. Jack says, I wasn't satisfied with their performance. I didn't ask the players to take a cut. I wanted them to explore options. So I think he's a little bit careful with his wording here to kind of, paddle around what is actually going on and what Ronnie just discussed. He does say that his intention when they bought the subliners or when they took over that spot was to keep that roster together, but HyDra wanted to leave. He says he wanted to form the HyDra and Scrap roster there, but HyDra wanted to go to LA, so they sold him because they wanted to relocate to Texas. And Cloud9 effectively weren't willing to facilitate that, whereas Los Angeles Thieves were. He says that their current approach is a short-term strategy that seems to work in the current environment. If that changes, we will adjust. And he says there's no intention to sell. I'm committed to the org. I have turned down inquiries from other organizations. So, here we go, baby. And this is what I'm talking about really with the franchise thing. Look, he does say that's the players, they're moving, he's paid for their rent for a month so they can figure out breaking fees or whatever, and it'll cover that if necessary. And this is the final thing he says. Our thinking is focused on putting players in a better position while they're with us regarding microtransaction sales and prize earnings. Players and coaches will earn 100%. I don't want to lose money for my investors, but I also want my players to earn. This will be to incentivize players to drive the most skin sales. Now, this works, I think, in something like Valorant where the skins are actually good. Unfortunately, in COD, despite the fact that the skins exist, they're not special, really. And if you're a player for Cloud9, your job, not even your job, but Jack is saying, look, you can earn all the money that you earn by pushing skin sales in the game. You get to keep. That seems to be the way for them to justify, well, we're going to pay you this, but that's your bonus. You effectively get a bonus if you sell skins, right? That's kind of the logic there. And I do think in other esports, this actually would work. In CODs, I think it's going to be more challenging to accomplish and really make any reasonable money out of. But I guess we shall see. My point is that in the pre-franchise world, if Cloud9 were paying that type of money, of which there are challengers teams that pay more, then those players would instead just go to that tier 2 team as it would traditionally be, but then they would take their spot in the Pro League, right? When there was promotion relegation, Cloud9 wouldn't be able to get away with this because the players that wouldn't want to pay for that type of money would instead play for another team that would be willing to pay more. And look, the organizations that are inquiring about these spots, they would just build a roster, pay more money than Cloud9 are offering. Those players would come to them, and then they would outplace and outqualify Cloud9, and they would be kicked out of the league. They wouldn't qualify, and the other team would qualify instead. So in most franchise sports, salaries aren't too much of a problem because they're all very high. Whereas in esports and in Call of Duty, that I think is what makes this problematic, is that you can talk all about the free market and whatever, that, okay, do the players really, are they owed any more than what they're getting paid here or whatever? Do they really add value? And sure, that's a conversation that the investors will be having with Jack, and I can understand his decision. But I do think that in a franchise environment, it causes problems, and the CDL need to have a think about this, because the teams are almost incentivized to do this, because why not? They're not going to get kicked out anyway. They could just say, oh no, we're not going to sell. Whereas in a different model, then they wouldn't be able to do this because they just get replaced by a team that was willing to spend a little bit more and actually get better players. So that's not how it works in this scenario. Anyway, that's the Cloud9 update. Rumour has it that Beans and Afro are doing what I said the other day, which is get on a top challengers team in North America and use the visa while you have it. Apparently, they will be joining the Falcons Academy, at least one of the Falcons Academies, with Standy. So this is actually coming from a Falcons source, which is pretty funny. He's a streamer for them, so he probably knows a thing or two. He says Afro, Beans, Standy are going to be on the Falcons Academy. So, and Afro Beans, they're going to make more money on this academy than they would if they kept the Cloud9 reduced offer, which is pretty remarkable. And look, maybe they can do enough here to prove that they're deserving of a spot in the future. Who knows? Spart has apparently turned down the Cloud9 offer. We actually right now don't know who's even going to accept it. There's been talk about Okis, but apparently Spart has said no. The flanks say want me, no, 100%. So that's how it seems. Like, Cloud9 seem to be having a hard time getting anyone to accept these offers. But presumably, as I discussed, in a franchise world, they will get some takers, and they will just ride out into the sunset as the worst team in the league. We shall see. Gersh even says, hit me up, right? You got no better offers? Me, Cowboy, Benjay Nassim, you know, I'll throw my hat in the ring. I'll play the league matches for 20k a year. Won't practice or anything, but, you know, I'll turn up to the games. So, you know, that's how I suppose it could be. Let's talk about Boston real quick. So Zuma says that Purge and Cammy could be on the way out. Now, he mentioned in Formal's stream that it could be, you know, they're looking to make some changes. Maybe it could be Purge or Cammy, but it looks like it might well be both. Now, is this the right call? It's a good question. Depends, I think, on who they get instead. Look, Nasty and Snoopy should stay for sure. I think that there were understandable questions after a challenging stage 1 on Purge's play, Purge's performance. Cammy is an interesting player. Like, I still think he's kind of got it to an extent. He does have the occasional map and the occasional series. You go, wow, okay, that's the Cammy that we know. But it almost feels like those maps and series, you know, he has a difficult run, and then he has a great map or series, and you're like, okay, yeah, Cammy's that guy, we'll keep him around. And he usually does it against a top team. But overall, in terms of on average, Cammy's, you know, lacking execution at times was probably one of the reasons why Boston were just a smidge off starting in the winners bracket. And if they were in winners, it would have been a different story. It's pretty tough when you're so close to making the winners bracket. You come to the major, you play FaZe, a team that came third, but probably should have been at least in the finals. You lose in 4 maps after leading the series during the overload, and then the team blows up. So I could see the logic either way here, but I also think that given this is when the Challengers players are most prepared, most available, a couple of the guys on Huntsman are also in the conversation. You know, I think a guy like, I'd be looking at Renegade right now for sure if I was Boston Breach. So that's a conversation to consider. But let's talk about some of the reaction to Kenny's departure. Thieves confirmed it yesterday, we talked about it last night, and several comments from Nadeshot that I'll share, but also from Scrap. I thought his thoughts here were pretty interesting because, well, he talks about how Kenny is one of the best teammates that he's ever had. This is what I said last night. Despite what people will think about Kenny's career in hindsight, if it is going to be over at this point, just because of the way the last couple of years went, Kenny was a phenomenal player individually and has been rated very highly by pretty much all of his teammates, and for understandable reasons. And look, for Scrap to say that he's one of the best teammates he's ever had is high praise. Now, of course, they still have dropped him, right? So this is always the thing when you hear these comments. It's like, well, if he really was that good, you wouldn't have got rid of him. But obviously the team needed to change. The major was going pretty well. They smoked Ravens in the first rounds. And then just that horrible Saturday really was a nail in the coffin. And as I said yesterday, whatever you think about Kenny, it couldn't have gone any better for Neum, right? Because they'd paid money to get the option. Neum had fried in challenges that weekend. The player that he was potentially going to replace had a horrible finish of the tournament. It's just, there was really no other decision in some way from like a psychological perspective than for Thieves to do what they did.
Listen, man, I want to start off by saying I can't appreciate the things that Kenny has done for Thieves enough. You know, I know he wasn't on the team last year. But the guy won us a world championship. He got us to the finals of another. He won us multiple events. Kenny's that guy. And he had a great career with 100 Thieves and LA Thieves. But look, the CDL is pretty cutthroat nowadays, man. And if you're not performing, at least statistically, as well as we think you should, you know, I mean, it's not fucking rocket science, guys. Every single person in the chat was saying, yo, we should make a change. In the CDL community, in this COD competitive subreddit. So, you know, those are just kind of the breaks, man. I got a ton of respect for Ken, and I'll always appreciate what he did for the org, bro. There's no other way around it.
That boy and Neum, man. By the way, I do need to bring this up to him because I was watching a video last night, and I'm not going to lie, I got a bit concerned. These two teams, dumbest teams I've probably ever watched. I promise you. The smartest one here is probably Merc. Smartest one here, Merc, by far. The question is, Mount Everest is located on which border? Or is located on the border of Nepal in which country?
You should get a guess now.
Okay, I'm not gonna act like I knew this.
Have to guess because then it goes back to that.
But I definitely didn't say this.
So at this point, just guess a country.
Ireland.
Yo, Ireland? Yo, Jay, Ireland? Yeah, I can't lie. Ireland's insane. He doesn't know shit about the world, but here he is in COD. That's all that matters. He's actually one of the, like, probably best teammates I've ever had, to be honest. But, like, all these, like, shit you hear about him, honestly, it's false. Like, Ken's, like, a super, you know, good leader in general. Because he came to our team and, honestly, did everything that we asked. And honestly, it just sucks that, like, we really couldn't work out. We didn't get the results we wanted. I think if the major probably goes better, we'd probably be in a different spot. But I think of how we lost the major. It's just how it goes, to be honest. But I'm never going to say anything about Ken. The whole time that Ken was with us, he was a good teammate. He made everything that we want him to change, you know. He changed for the better for our team. And that's all we could really ask for. So I'll never shit on Ken because I understood, like...
So will this work out for the Los Angeles Thieves? Neum is in instead of Kenny. They're going to get back to practicing in a couple of days' time. We shall see if the consistency that they want out of Neum is actually delivered, but also whether, you know, he still opens the door to the same kind of ceiling. I guess it's also worth saying, scrap HyDra and aBeZy. Doesn't really matter who the fourth is. They're going to have a pretty crazy ceiling regardless. The debate really has been around the floor of the team. How bad are they when things are going badly? And with Kenny, that was pretty damn bad. So maybe that's going to be a different story with Neum. But it's a competitive league. We know how good OpTic looked on LAN. They were 9-0 going into the finals. Gentlemates won the tournament in the end. They played some phenomenal stuff. FaZe arguably should have been there, right? And even then, you know, where do you go from there? G2. Okay, OpTic handled business there without too much difficulty, but they beat FaZe, they then played FaZe very close again in their losers bracket game. Even the Falcons, despite dropping out top 8, they lost to OpTic and FaZe, so, you know, and FaZe was it in 5, so again, they had a pretty decent tournament. All those teams right now looked better than where Thieves were, so they've certainly got a fair bit of work to do if they want to be a serious force again this year. But very much intrigued your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.